David 2 Central.
Go ahead, David, too.
Can you show me 1041 and put me out on a detail patrolling for recruits?
10-4, I'll sign you out.
Welcome back to Patrolling for Recruits, and I'll be your host again today, Detective Sergeant Hagelin with the Holland Department of Public Safety. And with the month of May quickly approaching us, we are going to focus on mental health awareness. So we're excited today to talk with one current member and one former member of the crisis intervention team. We're going to be talking with Officer Angerson, who has been a police officer with the Holland Department of Public Safety for 7.5 years, and Frankie Bader, who is a former member of the crisis intervention team and worked with Officer Angerson on a daily basis. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's talk about this crisis intervention team. Who makes up the crisis intervention team?
So currently, the crisis intervention team is made up of myself, so an officer at HPD, Michelle Sampson, a deputy for the Ottawa County Sheriff's Department, and then 2 clinicians from Ottawa County Community Mental Health, and they're trying to fill Frankie's old position, so it will be a 3rd clinician as well.
And with all these different members on the team, what is your goal with the crisis intervention team?
Yeah, so the goal is really just to make the crisis response system in Ottawa County as effective as possible and improve outcomes for all members of the community. Right now, we're seeing that a lot of agencies are kind of working in their own silos. They're doing the best with what they have within their own department, and we really love to expand collaboration across the county and across agencies just to really improve outcomes for everybody. And as part of that, the crisis intervention team training that we host is a large role in that, so training other law enforcement members and other members of the community. So that's kind of the overarching goal.
Yeah, so that training is a 40-hour training that we've been hosting about twice a year for local officers, HPD officers, Ottawa County Sheriff's Department, deputies, to kind of train them up in some of those CIT skills. But something I always like to talk about is that, like, a lot of people think when I talk about the training or we mention training, they're like, oh, so CIT is this training program, but it's a lot more than training, like Frankie was talking about. It's really this community collaboration between not only the police department and community mental health, but also the local agencies and resources that we reach out to and work with to get these better outcomes.
So I'm an older officer, a lot older than you. So this is something that's new, that wasn't around when I first started. So you're telling the listeners about this training that you're giving officers. I'm assuming these are tools that will help them deal with an individual that's in a crisis situation. Can you talk about what tools you're training these officers in to help community members?
Yeah, so we focus a lot on de-escalation training. So just using really good verbal communication skills to try to build rapport and trust with that person. And then another large focus of the training is just connecting those officers to the local community resources, those organizations that are designed and built to help those people, maybe not when they're necessarily like in that crisis moment, but after they've been de-escalated, can think a little bit more clearly and can get that help that they need.
Yeah, I think the resource fair aspect of the training, which is a 3-hour block, is I think one of the most impactful parts of the training. Participants really get a chance to sit down one-on-one with people from the organizations that come, and we had upwards of 20 organizations at the last training that we did in March. Mm-hmm. And it's a great time to really build that connection, know that there's somebody at that agency that I can call and talk to and figure out how we can help this person in need when we meet them out on the streets on a daily basis. So I think that's one of the biggest takeaways that all of the officers and deputies have come back as a positive experience.
Yeah, and I'd say another big takeaway from that training is just there's a lot of outside presenters that come into that training that are experts in their field, in the mental health field. So they present to these officers about signs and symptoms of these mental health issues that officers might not be aware of. So then when the officer does go to that call with someone in a mental health crisis, maybe previously they wrote it off as some other kind of issue, and now they're recognizing those signs and symptoms of the mental health crisis.
So I'm just wondering, how long has the crisis intervention team been together, and then how did this team come into existence?
Yeah, so CIT as a whole was actually started in 1988. It was founded in Memphis after an officer involved shooting with an individual in the community that was known to have pretty severe and persistent mental illness. The community kind of rallied behind this person who ended up dead and said, we want change. We want help and for these people with mental illnesses and substance use, and kind of destigmatize that as a whole across the community, which is where this training originally came from. CIT in Ottawa County, and specifically in Holland City, was started in September of 2021. That is when our team went to our first training as a collective group. We all went through the same kind of original 40-hour training that we now host in Detroit, and started working as co-response then. And I really think that the kind of larger admin of CMH, Community Mental Health, the Sheriff's Office, and Holland Public Safety recognize the need in our community and kind of want to integrate mental health and police as much as possible due to kind of the extreme need that we see, especially over the past couple of years. It seems that mental illness and substance use are just getting more severe and more prevalent in our community, more so than anything. Mm-hmm. So I think if we can come together collectively to try to help as many people, it's kind of the end goal.
And if somebody's going through a crisis, how do they get a hold of your team?
Yeah, so we work Monday through Friday, 8 to 4, so like normal business hours. But they can get a hold of us through dispatch, through Ottawa County Central Dispatch. So we're often responding to those calls with those individuals who are in an active mental health crisis. If they need to reach us outside of those normal business hours, we don't take like direct calls. However, officers will forward us their reports from like night shift, and then we will review those reports and follow up, hopefully within a few days, with those individuals to see if we can get them any more help.
So once again, we're talking with Officer Angerson and Frankie Bader. Both were member or former members of our crisis intervention team. And again, with the month of May coming up, we really want to focus on mental health awareness, but also in this Patrolling for Recruits podcast, let our recruits kind of know that are coming, to the Holland Department of Public Safety, what's available to them. And I know we touched on this a little bit. However, I just want to focus in a little bit on if a newer officer is coming to the Holland Department of Public Safety and they want to be a member of your team, how do they go about doing that, and what types of additional training would they have to go through in order to be a part of your team?
Yeah, so Frankie hit on it a little bit already, but we went through a 40-hour training over in Detroit, and that's the same 40-hour CIT training that we host. So that was kind of a prerequisite to be on the team, was to have the experience and knowledge from that training. So that would be a prerequisite. And of course, you need to be hired as an officer at HPD first and show that you have good interpersonal communication skills, can handle yourself well, and stay calm and collected during those stressful calls. So just putting your best foot forward and being the best officer that you can be once you're actually a part of patrol on the HPD team. That's how you're going to set yourself up for success to then become part of CIT.
And I think it really comes down to just a desire to want to work more specifically with the mentally ill and population and those who use substances. Like, I remember watching a specific officer get sworn in, and a couple months later, he was asking about what we were doing because he was interested and just wanting to kind of learn more about it. And he was one of the first people to come through our first training ever because there was just this desire to learn more and to kind of take that professional development aspect of it too.
Now, do you see these types of teams in every police department? Is Holland unique to have this team?
They're not in every police department. But as we've started this team, I think we've met several other teams like ours around the state. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily unique, but it's not like a well-known part of many police departments right now, at least. I think it's becoming a bigger part of a lot of police departments.
Yeah, and I would say the co-response aspect is definitely more unique than just being trained in crisis intervention. I think there are less co-response teams throughout our state and that we've met compared to just organizations or departments that have this training for their officers.
Yeah.
And what you're saying by that is that Holland actually partners with their community mental health and their officers to have that co-partnership, which I would assume offers a better response to those in a crisis.
Right, right.
And the fact that she's just riding along with me, like in the car
Every day.
with me every day, that is pretty unique.
How many, do you know the number of how many officers in the department are actually trained now?
I don't know the exact number. We're close to that 25%, so CIT International, which is kind of the governing body of CIT, recommends that about 20 to 25% of patrol officers be CIT trained. They're not recommending that 100% of the officers because it is a lot of additional training, that 40-hour training. And like Frankie mentioned, those officers have to have some kind of interest. They don't really want officers that are, not volunteering to do that and aren't interested.
So you talked earlier about some community partners and partnerships that you commonly use while you're dealing with somebody that's in a crisis. Can you speak to the listeners about that and about that process with your partnerships with other organizations?
Yeah, so our community partners are really at the core of what we do. We can't help other people without kind of the help of other agencies in our area. The biggest thing in general that we talk about doing is what's called a warm handoff. So that's either sitting with the person that we're responding to and calling together, maybe walking with them to the agency that they need to go to and introducing them to an agency staff member, just something to make that connection with them rather than just handing them a business card and say, oh, go call this number, they're open until 4 type thing. So some of the larger community partners that we use frequently are Community Action House. They have multiple programs that a lot of our community members utilize, and they are great, and they're so visible in our community, either at the library or community kitchen or Refresh or Food Club. I mean, we've used, I think, 100% of their services over the years. The Drop-In Center in Holland is a great resource for people just to kind of go and be with like-minded individuals. It's all run by peer recovery coaches. So those individuals with lived experiences are the ones running the organization, which is a great resource.
Reach for Recovery.
Reach for Recovery is another great one. Veteran Services, Momentum Center.
Yep.
Again, we've had all these kind of resources out to our community resource fair, at our training too, to really drive the point home. We can't do it alone, and that's kind of the whole point.
Yeah.
So from the sounds of it, communication within the community is super important in your job, and just utilizing all those resources and then communicating to those people within the crisis the options that they have available to them, which has to kind of put them in a better situation as well, just knowing, okay, I have all these different alternative options.
For sure.
So we haven't really touched on it, but I'm just wondering if one of you can answer this. If you're a member of the crisis intervention team, what does a typical day look like for you?
Yeah, so I get that question a lot, and there's really like no typical day. Just like on patrol, like you don't really have a typical day. I'd say it's pretty similar with CIT, but we do try to have like a little bit of a structure. So like oftentimes I notice that we would be following up on those night shift reports that we get through our email. We try to do that in the morning and try to like triage those reports and see, okay, who do we need to reach out to? Who can we follow up with by phone? Who do we need to go to their house and make in-person contact with them? And then going out and being in the community, doing those things, following up with those people, and occasionally following up with the organizations we work with as well, just to keep those contacts and relationships intact.
And do you communicate with, I'm sure you know more of the individuals within the community that are in a crisis. Do you communicate that to officers that are out on the road to kind of give them a heads up? Like, hey, you might be dealing with Detective Sergeant Hagelin today. He's going through this situation, to kind of give him a heads up. Is that communication going back and forth?
Yeah, we have done that, and that's definitely been a benefit to patrol, I think, because oftentimes on patrol they'll get several calls about the same person, and they're not really sure what's going on with them or how best to help them, and we can kind of dig into their background a little bit more, spend some more time with them, or look at some of their different histories and figure out, okay, how can we help this person, then how can we relay how to help that person to patrol.
Especially with some of those high utilizers of 911 who may not be calling for a true 911 related emergency, but they have no one else to call or no where else to call, right?
No,
Like they don't.
no family, no
Yeah.
support.
They might not know about the crisis lines. So we've had a couple of those individuals who we've built really great connections with over the past couple of years, and relaying that to officers too, like, oh, hey, I know so-and-so has been calling. We're working on directing those calls to XYZ if it's not a true emergency, and kind of going about that. And I know you've sent emails out that
Yep.
say relevant things. Yeah.
Right.
That's awesome. I can imagine a much safer response for not only the individual in crisis, but also the officer and community members than, say, 20 years ago when this team didn't exist. And so, what do you see in the future for this team? Obviously, you said 2021, right? That
Yeah.
this team came.
Yep.
What do you see 5 years from now, where your team's going to be at?
Yeah, I think we've talked about expansion privately before, and really keeping that 20 to 25% fidelity to what CIT International recommends. So whether there's turnover in the police department or in other agencies, really wanting to keep that kind of quarter of the departments trained fully, and kind of hosting those trainings, whether it looks like either yearly or quarterly, whatever kind of the need looks like, to really keep to the fidelity of the model.
Yeah, and also specifically with our training again, we've had some interest from other agencies within the community. Hospital security staff has reached out to us. They're interested in the CIT training. There's been some talk of maybe other emergency services like AMR receiving some of that training, as well as a few corrections officers, which we think it's very applicable in that setting too.
Once again, we're here with Officer Angerson and Frankie Bader. And just two last questions. Frankie, I'm going to shoot one at you first. So you've been working alongside law enforcement, not just Officer Angerson. And I'm just wondering, have you noticed a change in the way that officers are dealing with an individual that's in crisis compared to maybe before this team was put in?
Sure. I mean, I can't speak to 20 years ago, Sarge, because I am unfortunately not that old yet. But even just since starting, the one thing that I think I've noticed time and time again is how after individuals or officers have gone through this training, the ability to slow down and kind of take a breath when the situation allows for it, and safety is kind of paramount. And whenever the situation allows, they're able to slow down and sit with the person a little bit easier, and offer those one-to-one guidance and supports. Like there was one situation shortly before I left I was with an officer that wasn't Officer Angerson, and we were talking with the family of a man who had Alzheimer's. And the officers that I was with did a great job. He took the lead and was like, I have XYZ resources that I've used personally, and I am happy to share with you and kind of talk you through the process that I've gone through and I've seen work. And the family was so grateful that there was someone there who was listening, offering resources, and also kind of had a personal connection to it, which I think really made them feel as comfortable as possible for when their loved one was kind of dealing with something heavy right now.
That's awesome. I know that wouldn't happen 20 years ago. So it's great to see the police department just growing and the community growing, and also just the partnership with community mental health. That's awesome. So last question is for you, Officer Angerson. Having been a police officer now for 7 years, what advice would you give a potential recruit to help him or her become the best candidate heading into a police academy and then eventually looking for a police department to hire them?
Yeah, so I think a lot of new recruits think about a lot of like the physical abilities that they need to get through the academy, that they need to be, fit, in shape, and like start thinking like a police officer. But I would encourage them to really work on like their soft skills and their interpersonal skills. I think, we've seen from some of our new hires and whatnot that the thing that a lot of new hires struggle with is that interpersonal skills and dealing with individuals in the public who they have maybe never dealt with someone like them before. So being able to really work on those communication skills and interpersonal skills, it's going to help them not only in their career but in the interview too.
That's great advice. Great advice. Is there anything, I normally don't do this, but I don't know a lot about crisis intervention team. Is there anything that you want our listeners to know, whether it's ways to contact you or training that's available? Is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners?
I mean, especially in light of Mental Health Awareness Month in May, there tends to be a negative light on those individuals who have severe and persistent mental illness. And when you don't know a lot about it and you're not educated about it, it seems to be this kind of big, bad, scary thing, especially if you see people in our community who are visibly showing symptoms and signs of their mental illness. And I just want to encourage everybody to learn a little bit more and educate yourself on what people may be going through. It's destigmatization is huge when it comes to normalizing some of the things that we all experience. We all experience anxiety and depression in various ways. So I just kind of want to encourage everybody to get educated and kind of spread the light where they can.
That's great advice. And once again, we want to thank you so much for coming in to talk to us about the crisis intervention team and to speak a little bit about mental health awareness. And we just appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
David, too, is 1042 signing off.